He wasn't a lover. He wasn't a citizen. He was owned, his beauty bought, his silence expected. In the marble palaces of ancient Greece, where philosophers debated virtue and poets sang of glory, there lived a boy who couldn't speak his own name in public. He was too beautiful for freedom, too delicate for war. So they made him something else, a concubine to the elite, stolen as a child, trained to serve without resistance and displayed like a golden ornament. His life wasn't lived. It was performed. Behind the silk robes and honeyed wine were nights of loneliness, jealousy, and control. History didn't write his name. But behind every great statesman's portrait, there was someone like him in the background, unseen. This is the story of one such boy, and how ancient Greece glorified power by breaking its most fragile souls. His name had been Cleon once. It meant glory, though no one ever spoke it aloud. Anymore, at least. Not the way his mother used to whisper it, with hope in her breath and prayers in her hands. That was before the house raid, before the gates of his childhood closed forever. Now, in the high-walled estate of the Salos, a powerful Athenian archon, Cleon was called only one thing: Paetica, boy, but not like a son. Never like a son. In this world, Paetica meant beloved, but it didn't mean love. It meant owned. The auction of Innocence had only been 12 when they took him, slender, pale-skinned, and wide-eyed, with soft curls that shone like honey under the sun. The raid on his village was sanctioned, though quietly. A group of elites had grown tired of their current entertainments, and they wanted fresh beauty, unspoiled, well-shaped, docile. Cleon was brought to Athens with 8 other boys. They were stripped, washed, and lined up inside a shadowed hall. Under the Acropolis, a curtain separated them from the audience of bidders. One by one, they were summoned forward, told to walk slowly, turn, and smile. Cleon didn't smile. He trembled, but that didn't matter. His silence made him more desirable. The house of Thessals was a man of political weight, not a tyrant, but a tactician. A man who could quote Plato while twisting a dagger into your reputation. When he saw Cleon, he simply said, "That one." He paid the highest sum of the day. Cleon's price was more than a soldier's annual pay. And just like that, Cleon became part of a different war. The war of pleasure, power, and politics in the private chambers of the elite. He was taken to a villa carved into the cliffs overlooking the sea. Marble floors, lavender incense, soft fabrics, golden cups, but none of it belonged to Cleon. Even his own reflection no longer looked like his. The ritual of Rainamid first night. Cleon was given a necklace. It had no gem, just a small ivory disc engraved with a symbol. It stood for Psyche, the soul. "You'll wear this until your training is complete," said the old servant woman assigned to him. "Then he'll choose your new name." Cleon blinked. "But I have a name." She frowned. "Not anymore." From that moment on, his name became a secret, a thing to protect. His old identity was something he'd whispered to himself before, sleeping, as if reminding his bones not to forget who they were. The training of a beloved, he was bathed in goat's milk and massaged with oils, taught how to walk softly on polished floors, instructed never to raise his eyes unless spoken to, given lessons in music and poetry, not to understand them, but to entertain. His voice was modulated, his mannerisms coached. Smile with your lips, not your teeth. Don't laugh too loud. Don't smell of onions. Always make him feel like he is discovering you, even when he already owns you. Cleon was transformed into something pleasing, but never whole, and still. The Salos had not touched him. Not yet. The jealous one there was another concubine already in the house, Damon, older by 5 years, sharper than the blades in the kitchen, and already hardened by the game. He saw Cleon as a threat, not out of cruelty, but out of fear. "When they bring someone new," Damon whispered one night, "someone always disappears." It wasn't a warning. It was a prophecy. Damon had once been the favored one. He knew what it meant to be bathed in wine and draped in affection. But favor in this house was fragile. It cracked under age, bruises, or even a wrong expression. And now, Cleon was fresh. Damon's eyes held sadness, not for Cleon, but for himself, knowing his own exit might be near. The first onset happened on the 19th night. A servant boy, no older than Cleon himself, knocked on his chamber door. "He wants to see you." Cleon's heart thundered, not because he didn't know what was coming, but because he did. He was draped in sheer fabric, perfumed with myrrh, and led barefoot down a dim corridor. The room smelled of wine and sandalwood. The Salos was seated, cross-legged, reading from a scroll. He looked at Cleon like one admires a painting. "Come closer," he said. Cleon did. "Speak. Tell me your favorite word." Cleon hesitated. Then, "Sky." The Salos smiled. I'll call you that then. Oranos, a new name. A new mask. That night, Cleon died again, quietly within his own skin. The loneliness of the beautiful after that night. The Solos visited Cleon often, but never the same way twice. Sometimes with laughter. Sometimes with silence. Sometimes with cruel, wordless hands that treated Cleon not as a person, but as a canvas for desire. And yet, Cleon learned to perform happiness, because Damon was gone now. No explanation, no farewell, just a folded tunic. Left behind in the corner of the courtyard, Cleon begins to forget weeks turn to months. His real name felt heavy on his tongue. His mother's voice became faint in his memories. His back ached from posture drills. His stomach ached from pretending he was grateful. The other servants whispered when he passed. Some pitied him, others envied him. That boy eats figs with the master. He wears gold. He gets to sit beside him during symposia. They didn't understand. They thought the price of beauty was attention. Cleon knew the truth. The price of beauty is never feeling safe again, alone again some nights. The Solos didn't call for him, and Cleon would lie in the quiet, staring up at the painted ceiling of his chamber, a fresco of constellations. He would trace the stars with his finger and whisper, Cleon, my name is Cleon. My name was Cleon, as if reminding himself he was once more than a possession. The longer Cleon lived in the Solos villa, the more he realized he wasn't alone, but he was never truly with anyone either. There were others, other boys like him, past and present. Their names were not spoken. Their faces faded quickly from the memory of servants. A few might stay for a year, others only weeks. They disappeared without ceremony, just missing one day, as if they had never existed. Cleon wondered if that would be his fate too. And yet, the Solos kept him close, too close. He no longer slept in the small chamber near the servant quarters. Now, he rested on silk pillows in a private room adjacent to the master's. The walls were thick, the windows narrow, and the door always closed. Outside, life in Athens moved like nothing was wrong. The markets buzzed. The statues stood tall. The philosophers debated in the agora. But inside these stone walls, Cleon's world was shrinking. Every compliment the Solos gave became a chain. Every favor disguised control. You look divine today. You may not attend the party. I don't want them looking at you. You belong to me. And he did. More than he had ever realized. Cleon once tried to ask if he could walk down to the shoreline, just to see the sea. It had been months since he'd heard the sound of waves. The Solos said nothing at first. He merely stood up, walked to Cleon, and took his chin in one hand. You have everything here. What could the sea give you that I don't? Cleon whispered, air. The Solos' grip tightened just for a second. Then breathe when I say you can. That was the end of that. The villa was not silent, though it often felt like it. Rumors lived in the servants' glances. Every interaction was wrapped in politics, especially when guests arrived. The Solos loved to entertain. He hosted symposiums with poets, strategists, and senators. The wine flowed freely, the floors were scrubbed spotless, and Cleon was often placed at the center of the room dressed in white, lips colored with pomegranate, hair oiled and braided with threads of gold. He never spoke at these events. His job was to be present, a thing of beauty, an accessory of prestige. At one of these gatherings, a visiting dignitary from Corinth whispered loud enough for Cleon to hear, Does it feel powerful to keep a painting alive and breathing? The room chuckled. The Solos smiled coldly and replied, It feels necessary. Cleon never forgot that night, not because of the laughter, but because for the first time, he truly felt like an object. There was, however, one man who looked at Cleon differently, a young philosopher named Timandros, who studied under Sophocles. He was not powerful, not rich, but he had eyes that flickered with quiet defiance. During one dinner, Timandros leaned forward and placed a fig on Cleon's plate. Eat. He said gently, Not for him, for you. It was a small act, a whisper of rebellion in a house where no one breathed without permission. From then on, whenever Timandros visited, Cleon felt the faint flicker of warmth, a smile that wasn't required, a glance that wasn't hungry. And the Solos noticed. 3 days after that dinner, Cleon was not summoned for the evening, nor the next, nor the one after. Instead, he was locked inside his chamber, the food left outside the door. No visitors, no answers. He heard servants speak in hushed tones. Timandros is gone, exiled. No one knows why or where. Cleon pressed his ear to the cold stone wall and whispered his own theory. He saw me as human. He saw me as human. That was enough to make him dangerous. When the Solos finally returned to his room, he didn't speak. He poured wine, stared at Cleon for a long time, then said, You should never confuse pity for love. Cleon didn't answer. I saved you from poverty, from dying nameless. You erased my name, Cleon replied. Quietly, for a moment, the Solo's face rose. Then he smiled, and gave you one worthy of poetry. That night, the Solos did not touch Kleon. Instead, he took out a scroll and read aloud about the tragedy of Narcissus, the boy who fell in love with his own reflection. He died because he could only love himself. The Solos said, but you? You survived because I love you. Cleon thought about the myth, about the water, about how drowning looked like reflection until it was too late. Time passed, but days did not feel like progress. Cleon watched as new boys arrived. He saw the same cycle begin: training, perfume, performance. The younger ones looked at him with envy, not knowing he had once looked at someone else the same way. One boy, only 10, asked him in secret, will he love me like he loves you? Cleon's stomach turned. He wanted to scream, to shake the boy and say you don't want that kind of love. But instead, he only said, I hope not. The servants began to avoid Cleon, not out of disrespect, but because being associated with him meant scrutiny. The Solos had become possessive, controlling. Any kindness shown toward Cleon could be perceived as betrayal. He lived in luxury, but felt starved. He was fed delicacies but hungered for a name, a touch without consequence, a moment of quiet that wasn't soaked in tension. Even the other concubines began to fear him. One night, during a rare walk in the garden, one of the boys passed him and whispered, you're the favorite. That makes you the most dangerous one here. Cleon knew what he meant. The higher you are placed in a palace like this, the faster you fall when the master tires of you. Then came the day the Solos received a letter from Sparta, a political offer, a dangerous one that could shift power in the city-state, and it required him to marry publicly. The announcement came without warning. A banquet was held, and Cleon, he was not invited. He watched from a high window as the Solos took the hand of a woman he had never met and declared her his betrothed. Everyone clapped. Everyone smiled. No one looked up. No one saw Cleon disappear into his own shadow. That night, the Solos entered his room, not with wine, not with laughter, but with finality. It's time, he said. You've had a beautiful place here, but beauty fades, and politics requires sacrifice. Cleon stared at him. What happens to me now? You'll be sent to the country. It's peaceful there. You'll be cared for. Until you forget me. The Solos tilted his head. I never forget anything I've owned. Cleon flinched. Not because of the words, but because he realized they were the last honest thing the Solos had ever said to him. Alone in his chamber, Cleon took off the necklace with the ivory disc. He held it in his palm. Psyche. The soul, and wondered how long it had been since his belonged to him. The carriage to the countryside arrived at dawn. No ceremony, no farewell. A single guard stood beside it, waiting for Cleon to climb in like livestock. Not a single servant waved. Not a single word was spoken as he left the estate he had been trapped in for nearly 3 years. He wore no gold. No rings, no perfume. Just a pale linen robe and silence. Even the necklace, that final marker of who he had once been, was gone. Left on the marble windowsill intentionally as a small rebellion. He no longer wanted to carry any of it. The ride was long. The driver didn't speak. The road wound past olive groves, farms, quiet temples. This land was freer, less watched. But Cleon didn't feel freedom. He felt absence. Absence of control. Absence of identity. Absence of rage. He wasn't even angry. That was the worst part. It had been taken from him too. The countryside retreat turned out to be a modest villa owned by one of the Solos cousins. A widow, older, distant. She offered Cleon a room and meals but avoided conversation. He was not there as a guest. He was a ghost. She said only one thing the first night. I'm told you won't cause problems. He didn't. Cleon took up tending to a garden. The widow allowed it, maybe because it meant she didn't have to interact with him. So he worked quietly, his hands deep in soil, his mind somewhere far away, pulling weeds, tilling the earth. The physical work helped remind him that his body wasn't only for display anymore. He began to heal. But healing, he learned, isn't just painful, it's terrifying. There were moments when he'd wake up gasping, unsure of where he was, moments when a gentle breeze would remind him of the Solos' breath, where the crack of thunder would sound like a door slamming shut behind him. The body never forgets. Even when the mind wants to. Years passed. Yes, years. No visitors came. No letters arrived. He had no name, no coin, and no family. The widow died eventually. Her sons took over the villa, and Cleon, still silent, still helpful, was allowed to stay on as a servant. No one asked who he was. No one cared. In that forgotten corner of Greece, Cleon finally began to live, not as someone's concubine, not as a possession, but as a person who could go unnoticed, who could go unremembered. There was peace in that, in a strange way, but it came with grief to because even in freedom, he didn't know who he was anymore. One spring morning, a traveling scribe passed through the region, looking for work and board. Cleon offered him bread and pointed toward the villa. As they sat under the olive trees, the scribe asked Cleon what his name was. The question hit him harder than it should have. He opened his mouth and nothing came out. He didn't say Oranos, the name the Salos gave him. He didn't say Paetica, the title forced upon him. He didn't even say Cleon, his birth name. Buried beneath layers of memory and shame, instead, he whispered, "I don't remember." The scribe nodded slowly. "I write stories," he said, after a long pause. "Would you like me to write yours?" Cleon looked up. Why would anyone care? Because someone should. That night, Cleon sat by candlelight and spoke, not everything. Not the darkest nights. Not the touches. Not the scars, but enough. Enough for someone else to carry a piece of it forward. Not for fame. Not for pity. Just so it wouldn't vanish. Just so he wouldn't vanish. The story was eventually smuggled to Athens under a different name. Coded. Altered. Fictionalized. A parable about a beautiful boy taken into the service of a tyrant. The aristocrats read it and praised its poetry. The poets praised its symbolism. No one realized it was real. No one knew the boy's name. That was the cost of being born beautiful in a world that only valued control. Decades later, long after the Salos died from wine poisoning and his estate was divided among squabbling heirs, a ruined villa near the sea sat crumbling under moonlight. In the back of one chamber, hidden behind a fallen curtain, a small ivory disc lay on the floor. Faded, chipped, but still marked with a single letter, said the soul. But whose? No one would ever know. Ever know.